Hi, I'm Mina.
And I'm Yules.
Thanks for tuning in to Artificially Informed.
Welcome to the Deep Dive, the show where we take that huge stack of global intelligence, all the articles, the data, the political chess moves, and we try to boil it down into something you can actually use.
We're here to guide you through it all, to help you become the most informed person in any room, whether the conversation turns to the shaky ground of global finance or, the search for a 2,000-year-old tomb.
And today our mission is, well, it's pretty broad, but it's all connected. We're plunging right into that high-stakes intersection of technology, finance, and international law.
We've got sources covering just about everything. The cosmic dance of a meteor shower, the legal minefield being created by new AI executive orders.
And the really big one, the economic and, frankly, moral questions that come with freezing $250 billion in state assets.
It really is a fascinating snapshot of global friction. You have this incredibly rapid technological growth just slamming head-on into these old, established governance structures. And the result is, well, often it's spectacular chaos.
And chaotic is definitely the right word for what's happening in the financial sector. Our hook today starts right there, at that volatile meeting point of tech and money. Wall Street is suddenly, and I mean suddenly, hitting the brakes.
Yeah, investors are getting genuinely scared of the very thing they were just pouring billions and billions of dollars into artificial intelligence.
Okay, let's unpack this. The market just saw an 11% drop for one single tech giant. And this was despite them reporting fantastic earnings, all because of something being called AI anxiety.
It's a fascinating turn of events.
So let's start with that market panic, because on the surface, the numbers, they just don't make any sense at all.
They really don't. You saw all the major indices, the Dow Jones Industrial Average, the S&P 500, and of course the tech-heavy NASDAQ, they all closed lower. They basically erased all the gains they'd made earlier in the week.
And the official reason being given is?
What?
Fears of an AI bubble, and of course the old story, persistent inflation.
The term AI bubble is really the key here. It explains what seems like completely irrational behavior from investors.
Okay, so what's so fascinating about it?
It's why the market is ignoring what should be great news. Take Broadcom. They're a huge player in the semiconductor and infrastructure space. They reported blockbuster earnings, numbers that should have sent their stock through the roof.
And instead?
It plummeted, a staggering 11% drop. So this isn't a reaction to bad performance. This is a deep systemic fear that the entire AI sector is just wildly overvalued compared to what's actually achievable in the short term.
It sounds like the classic gap between potential and reality. Investors priced in all the amazing things AI could do in the future, and now they're waking up and asking, okay, but where are the actual data centers to support all this growth right now?
That is it, precisely. We're seeing what analysts are calling AI angst. It's this creeping realization that the growth trajectory might just be impossible to sustain, not without a massive, and I mean immediate, leap in data center capacity and the energy to power them.
And this anxiety is starting to crystallize around some specific, very big corporate bets.
It is. Look at Oracle Corporation. They are making an absolutely enormous bet on AI. We're talking a $300 billion commitment to the technology.
$300 billion.
A huge number. But then they announced delays in getting their new data centers completed. And suddenly, that massive investment wasn't seen as visionary anymore. Wall Street started calling it a bubble barometer.
So the thinking is that if even a giant like Oracle is hitting snags, then the whole system must be under strain.
Exactly. It suggests they might be overextended, or that the supply chain for building out this infrastructure, the specialized chips, the cooling systems, even just getting access to the land and power, is stretched way thinner than anyone was admitting.
The fundamental question is whether the physical world, the actual power grids and supply chains, can catch up with the financial valuation. And speaking of colossal valuations that are tied almost entirely to future potential, we have to transition to the astronomical kind. Literally. SpaceX is just dominating the financial news with a valuation that feels like it's straight out of science fiction.
It really does. SpaceX is still a largely private company, but it's just reached an astounding $800 billion valuation, and that's based on an insider share deal.
$800 billion. And that's built on, what? Ambition, mostly.
Almost entirely on ambition. It's based on the future potential of their global Starlink satellite network and, of course, the big one, their long-term goal of sending crewed missions to Mars.
That's nearly $1 trillion riding on a promise for the future. You have to wonder, how much longer can a company of that scale even remain private?
Not much longer, it seems. CEO Elon Musk confirmed the reports that they are planning for an initial public offering, an IPO, sometime in 2026.
And you can bet that the volatility we're seeing in the AI sector, that complete reliance on future earnings and the fear of being overvalued, that's absolutely going to spill over and affect how investors treat the SpaceX IPO.
Oh, without a doubt. It is arguably the ultimate high-risk, high-reward bet on the commercialization of space. There's nothing else quite like it.
The sheer speed of all this,
Yeah.
whether it's AI or it's rockets, it just highlights a critical point, doesn't it? Innovation is just running so fast that our systems of governance are just sputtering to try and keep up.
Which leads us directly into our next topic, the clash over AI governance, specifically right here in the United States, where these attempts at regulation are creating some serious legal friction between the federal government and state powers.
So President Trump recently signed an executive order on AI. The administration is championing it as providing one rule book for the entire country. What does that actually mean in practice?
Well, the stated goal is all about unification and acceleration. The administration wants to streamline the whole regulatory landscape. They want a single, simplified national framework for AI.
And crucially, they want to preempt all the different state laws that have been bubbling up, right?
That's the key. They want to get ahead of states like California, which has been really proactive on this front. The argument from the White House is that having this patchwork of complex state regulations just hampers the pace of innovation.
It makes it harder for U.S. companies to compete globally, especially against a unified system like China's.
That's the claim. It sounds like a pure pro-business deregulation move, just cut the red tape. But it is highly, highly controversial.
Why is that? What's the big pushback?
It all comes down to the constitutional questions it raises. This power to preempt state law, to essentially force states to just follow the federal rulebook, that's a significant legal maneuver. It's typically based on the supremacy clause of the Constitution.
And critics, like California Governor Gavin Newsom, are saying this order goes way too far.
They are. They argue it's an attempt to seize regulatory authority too broadly and that it actually creates a legal limbo for startups. Think about it as the courts start to weigh the balance of federal oversight versus state rights.
Especially in areas like data privacy and consumer protection, which states have traditionally been in charge of.
Right. The legal uncertainty could actually increase for these startups, not decrease. They're stuck trying to figure out who they're supposed to be complying with.
And we should be clear, this isn't just adding a new layer on top of the existing framework. This new order explicitly rescinded former President Biden's Executive Order 14.1.10.
It's a complete 180, a total ideological pivot. Biden's order was heavily focused on things like competition, protecting civil liberties, and requiring really rigorous testing for potential AI harms.
Whereas the Trump order shifts the focus entirely toward competitive acceleration and a much more minimalist regulatory approach.
It really reflects a fundamental disagreement at the federal level about what the primary role of government should be here. Is it to regulate risk, or is it to promote speed?
And if the United States is struggling this much to agree on just the basic principles of AI governance, you can imagine the global stage isn't doing much better.
Not at all. Especially when you start to bring environmental concerns into the mix. We can see this playing out perfectly through the lens of the United Nations Environment Assembly, or UNEA.
So UNEA adopted its first ever resolution on AI and the environment. That sounds like a good thing, a step forward.
On the surface, it does. Using AI for sustainability, trying to minimize its bad side effects. But when you dig into the details, you find a major, major failure in accountability.
And the major omission here is, it's really concerning because it seems to ignore the single biggest environmental cost of the technology itself.
Exactly. The resolution deliberately, and I mean deliberately, failed to include any language that would mandate monitoring the full AI lifecycle.
So things like water, energy, and critical mineral consumption, the stuff that actually powers these things.
The very real physical inputs. We're talking about massive server farms that require immense amounts of water for cooling and just a staggering amount of electricity to run. Kenya's representative, Faith Minyalo, she voiced serious concern about this. She basically said that without addressing this life cycle accountability, any claims of sustainable AI are just. They're aspirational, maybe even meaningless.
So wait, let me get this straight. We have a resolution about making AI green that intentionally lets the biggest environmental costs stay completely off the books. That seems counterproductive.
It is, and it happened because of geopolitical lobbying. Countries like Saudi Arabia, Russia, and the United Arab Emirates, they successfully pushed to have all of those references to life cycle accountability removed.
Which really underscores how geopolitical influence can just gut any robust environmental commitments.
Especially when the underlying technology, these data centers, rely so heavily on resource-intensive and often fossil fuel-dependent energy infrastructure.
And the forecasted cost of this emission is just enormous. The current estimates I've seen suggest that electricity consumption from data centers is on track to double by 2030.
Double. And if that growth stays dependent on fossil fuels, it completely derails global climate goals. So this resolution, while it's being called historic, it looks a lot more like a political compromise to appear green rather than a binding commitment to actually be green.
It raises a really important question, doesn't it? For regulators and for us as consumers, are we prioritizing the appearance of green, sustainable tech over the measurable, costly reality of its enormous physical footprint?
That's the billion-dollar question.
And that kind of structural failure really resonates when we turn to our next issue: algorithmic bias and tech resilience. Let's talk about this specific and frankly strange case being reported on LinkedIn. Some users have dubbed it bro coding.
This is a perfect, very modern example of how structural bias, even if it's completely unintentional, gets baked right into these algorithms that are supposed to be objective.
So what happened?
Well, a number of women on LinkedIn, which is the professional networking platform, they conducted these informal experiments, and they suggested that the algorithm shows a clear preference. They found a significant boost in their post visibility, in the traction and engagement they got when they subtly changed their profiles or their language.
To adopt what they called male-like characteristics? So if you present yourself or your ideas in a way that's seen as traditionally dominant or masculine, the system rewards you for it.
That's the perception, and it's supported by their findings. Now, LinkedIn, of course, denies any explicit gender favoritism. They point to all these complex metrics related to user engagement.
But whether the problem is in the code itself or just in the training data, the result is the same, isn't it?
The result is exactly the same. The training data is historically skewed toward amplifying male voices and presentations in these high-status professional spaces. So the algorithm just learns that and reinforces it. It amplifies existing gender disparities.
Potentially limiting the reach and influence of half the professional population. It forces people to conform to an established and biased norm just to be seen.
Precisely.
So if that's the serious flaw, let's look at a more amusing one. We've been talking about AI as if it's on the verge of taking over the world, but sometimes it can't even handle a simple TV show summary.
Right. Amazon provided a spectacular demonstration of AI's current limits this week. They had to pull an AI-generated recap of their popular TV show, Fallout.
Why? What did it do?
It produced several glaring inaccuracies. It just got the plot wrong. And it's such an interesting juxtaposition, you know? One minute, we're talking about AI threatening to destabilize global finance. The next, it can't correctly summarize a basic story about a post-apocalyptic wasteland.
It's a good reminder that for anything that requires factual nuance or any kind of quality control, human oversight is still absolutely essential.
Mentally necessary, yes.
Speaking of human control and independence, let's wrap up this segment by looking at hardware and sovereignty. China is continuing its relentless push for domestic tech independence right in the middle of severe international sanctions that were designed to cripple its progress.
And Huawei is really spearheading that drive. They just unveiled their new flagship smartphone, the Mate 80 series, and the big news is what's inside. The new China-made Kirin 9030 chip.
This chip was developed by SMAKE, which is China's top semiconductor foundry, using what they're calling enhanced 7-nanometer technology. Now, 7 nanometers is a number that sounds kind of abstract. Technologically, what does that actually signify, especially in the context of these sanctions?
It signifies a crucial strategic victory for them. So for you listening, in this global race for miniaturization, the 7-nanometer node is highly advanced. It's still a few steps behind the absolute cutting edge that's being produced in the US, Taiwan, and South Korea.
They're pushing into 3-nanometer and 2-nanometer territory now.
Right. But you have to remember, the U.S. imposed sanctions specifically designed to cut China off from the most advanced chip-making tools, these EUV lithography machines. So for them to reach an enhanced 7-nanometer technology on their own, that is much faster progress than most Western analysts had predicted.
So the sanctions didn't stop them. In a way, they actually force them to accelerate their own domestic innovation.
That's exactly what happened. This continued progress towards self-sufficiency is a critical strategic move. It insulates Huawei from foreign dependency, and it ensures China can maintain a competitive edge in high-end consumer electronics and, potentially, military applications, all without relying on Western tech.
And the geopolitical implications of that kind of technical self-sufficiency are, well, they're enormous. It fundamentally weakens one of the West's primary tools of influence, which is technology sanctions.
It really does. It changes the game.
That whole discussion about sanctions and tech self-reliance really sets the stage perfectly for our next segment. We're going to focus on geopolitical financial warfare, which has hit a new peak with the handling of Russian assets.
The European Union just took a profoundly decisive and I think globally controversial action. They have agreed to indefinitely freeze Russian central bank assets. We're talking about a total of approximately 210 billion euros.
Which translates to what, roughly 247 billion US dollars?
That's right.
Indefinitely, and almost $250 billion. That is an absolutely unprecedented step. How did the EU even manage to pull this off without getting completely bogged down in internal politics?
Yeah.
Major foreign policy moves like this usually require a unanimous vote.
They used a very high-stakes legal mechanism. They invoked their emergency treaty powers, specifically Article 122 of the EU treaties.
And what does Article 122 allow them to do?
It allows decisions to be made by a qualified majority, not unanimity, in extraordinary economic circumstances. So it was a clear tactical maneuver specifically to prevent Moscow-leaning states from vetoing the asset freeze.
We're talking about countries like Hungary and Slovakia.
Primarily, yes, it was to get around their objections.
But wait a minute. Does this set a precedent that could fundamentally undermine the EU's whole governance structure for future policy decisions?
Yeah.
Even non-emergency ones.
That is precisely the core legal concern that's being raised. Using Article 122 like this, it signals that the political imperative to support Ukraine has, at least for now, outweighed the traditional need for consensus. It creates a crack in the very foundation of the EU's decision-making process.
And the intended use for this colossal pile of frozen cash is what?
The plan is to use the profits generated by these assets to back a reparations loan for Ukraine. Kyiv has estimated it needs about 135.7 billion euros over the next 2 years just to maintain essential government services, healthcare, and of course support its ongoing military efforts.
But this decision has created massive internal discord, and it goes far beyond just the predictable opposition from Hungary and Slovakia.
Oh, absolutely. Hungary and Slovakia, they condemned the move as unlawful. They argued it violates international conventions about sovereign assets. But more importantly, countries like Italy, Belgium, Bulgaria, and Malta also expressed very serious legal and financial concerns.
What were their concerns?
They fear that this unprecedented unilateral seizure, even if it's justified by war, could severely damage global trust in the EU's financial system. And it could really hurt the reputation of the euro as a stable reserve currency.
The fear is that if the EU can just decide to freeze Russia's central bank assets today, then other nations, even allies, might get nervous about holding their own reserves in euros tomorrow.
That is the long-term risk, exactly. By weaponizing the financial system in this way, the EU is introducing a precedent that could lead to a fragmentation of global finance.
And Russia's reaction was, I assume, predictable.
Very predictable. They've denounced the freeze as illegal, they've labeled any use of the funds as theft, and they're threatening significant economic retaliation, including targeting the assets of EU member states that are still within Russia. It's financial warfare, pure and simple. The long-term consequences are highly unpredictable.
And as the EU is grappling with all that internal friction, the shadow of China is just looming larger and larger in the background of this whole conflict. Let's talk about China's deepening role in supporting Russia.
The concern among EU officials and intelligence agencies is really escalating. It's moving way beyond just simple diplomatic ties. They're citing reports that suggest around 80% of critical dual-use goods are now reaching Russia either from or through China.
And dual-use goods are materials that can be used for both civilian manufacturing and for military applications, right? Things like specialized electronics, navigation systems, machine tools.
That's right. And 80% is not neutral. That is a fundamental supply line that is enabling Russia to continue its military production.
It directly contradicts China's persistent claims that they're neutral in the Ukraine war.
It does. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has noted this increased military cooperation. He's expressed disappointment that international pressure hasn't succeeded in stopping this flow of goods. So you can be sure that future EU discussions are going to be focusing intently on what to do about this deepening alliance.
They'll be looking at what specific secondary sanctions or diplomatic actions might be necessary to close this crucial supply loophole.
Absolutely.
Okay, let's move now to some active hotspots. We're seeing an almost confusing situation on the border between Thailand and Cambodia, which is prone to these sudden, often contradicted ceasefires.
The situation there is highly unstable. It all revolves around these disputed territorial claims that go back decades. Fighting recently flared up again, which led Cambodia to close its border crossings, despite the fact that President Trump had announced a ceasefire agreement between the two nations just hours earlier.
Wait, so President Trump announces a diplomatic win, a ceasefire, and then the fighting immediately resumes?
Correct. And it really highlights the danger of external powers announcing these deals without fully securing the granular, on-the-ground commitment from the local forces.
So what happened?
Thailand's government immediately had to issue a clarification. They said that any halt to hostilities was strictly contingent on Cambodia's complete withdrawal from those specific disputed areas, which are near the ancient Preah Vihear Hair Temple.
And Cambodia refused to withdraw its troops.
They did. So Thailand's military operations continued, which led to more fighting and directly contradicted the White House's announcement. It's a bit of a diplomatic mess.
That seems to be a recurring theme, doesn't it? External diplomacy just failing to align with the realities on the ground. Meanwhile, in Central Africa, the conflict in the Eastern Democratic Republic of Congo is intensifying, raising fears of a much broader regional war.
The conflict is focused on the resurgence of the M23 rebels. They're an armed group that recently seized the strategic city of Uvira in the eastern DRC. The United Nations is warning this has made an already grave humanitarian crisis even worse, resulting in significant civilian displacement and casualties.
And once again, the U.S. is explicitly pointing the finger at a neighboring state for escalating the whole conflict.
Yes, the United States has strongly criticized Rwanda. They're accusing them of violating a previously brokered peace deal by allegedly supporting the M23 rebel group with both arms and logistics.
And that kind of condemnation really raises the political temperature.
It does, significantly, especially as the UN peacekeeping efforts are struggling to stabilize the region. There is a genuine fear that this M23 escalation could widen into a much larger regional conflict and destabilize neighboring countries like Burundi and Uganda.
And we return, finally, to Ukraine, where a new version of peace talks is underway, once again involving an envoy from the Trump administration.
Yes, President Trump's special envoy, Steve Witkoff, is meeting with Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky in Berlin, along with other European leaders. They're discussing the latest peace plan, which the administration hopes will finally bring an end to the conflict.
We've heard reports that this plan is deeply controversial, that it involves some complex territorial concessions.
That is the most politically complex and explosive element of the plan. Reports indicate that the proposal includes the highly controversial option of potentially ceding some Ukrainian territory to Russia as part of the deal.
Which proponents would call a pragmatic approach to just end the fighting.
But which many Ukrainian nationalists would view as an unacceptable reward for aggression. The urgency, though, is underscored by Russia's continued targeting of critical infrastructure. They've had recent attacks that destroyed health supply warehouses, which is severely impacting the availability of medicine just as winter is setting in.
The long shadow of U.S. political and military involvement continues across Latin America as well, where we're seeing armed groups directly linking their actions to U.S. foreign policy.
This is a direct example of a local political group asserting itself against what it perceives as external pressure. The Colombian National Liberation Army, or ELN, one of the oldest and most active guerrilla groups there, declared a 72-hour nationwide armed strike, starting December 14th.
And their stated reason for this strike is to protest increased U.S. military activity in the country.
Explicitly. And they specifically linked this U.S. activity to President Trump's agenda. They assert that U.S. military actions, including what they called a boat bombing campaign targeting ELN members, are part of a neo-colonial agenda of imperialist intervention.
And this isn't just rhetoric. They warn civilians to avoid travel on roads or rivers during this time, creating widespread disruption and fear.
It really highlights how this high-level geopolitical rhetoric gets immediately translated into very tangible, very local security crises.
Elsewhere in the region, Cuba is also asserting its sovereignty against U.S. actions, but this time on the maritime front.
Cuba condemned a recent U.S. seizure of a petroleum tanker in international waters. They called it an act of maritime terrorism and argued the U.S. had overstepped its jurisdiction. It just highlights these ongoing tensions over maritime laws and external pressure, often tied to U.S. sanctions policy.
And finally, let's go back to Europe, where we have a serious cyber escalation involving a key NATO ally.
Germany has formally accused Russia of a targeted cyber attack that disrupted its air traffic control systems and, even more worryingly, included attempts at electoral interference targeting upcoming regional votes.
That's a serious accusation.
Very serious. Germany summoned the Russian ambassador in a formal diplomatic protest. It just underscores the serious nature of hybrid warfare, where these cyber threats are now intrinsically intertwined with national security and democratic integrity all across the continent.
All right, after that very intense geopolitical segment, I think we could all use a bit of a cosmic palate cleanser. Let's look up. It is a stellar time for stargazers right now as we enter the peak of one of the most reliable and spectacular annual shows.
Yes, the Geminid meteor shower is peaking right now, specifically on the nights of December 13th and 14th. This is really considered one of the highlights of the year for meteor showers. You can see up to 150 meteors per hour under ideal dark sky conditions.
150 per hour. That rate is just incredible. Where does this shower actually come from?
It originates from an asteroid named 3200 Phaethon. Most meteor showers, they come from comets, but the Geminids are unique because they originate from an asteroid that crosses Earth's orbit, and that's what makes it so incredibly reliable every year.
So for anyone listening who wants to catch the show, what's the best advice?
It's pretty simple. You need to find a dark area, get away from city light pollution, let your eyes adjust for about 20 minutes, and then just look toward the northeast part of the sky. That's where the constellation Gemini lies. The best viewing time will be after midnight, just before dawn.
A beautiful reminder of our cosmic setting. And speaking of our cosmic footprint, we need to celebrate some major achievements. Two of NASA's most significant recent missions just received a major and very well-deserved honor.
That's right. The National Aeronautics and Space Administration's, or NASA's, James Webb Space Telescope, the JWST, which has given us these just unprecedented views of the early universe.
And the Curiosity rover, which has been exploring the surface of Mars since way back in 2012.
Both of them have been inducted into Time's Best Inventions Hall of Fame, and it's a recognition of their truly groundbreaking innovation and the profound global impact they've had on both astronomy and planetary exploration over the last quarter century.
It's fantastic. However, not all celestial activity is beautiful and predictable. We had a pretty frightening reminder this week about the dangers of space traffic, which is becoming incredibly congested up there.
Yeah, SpaceX reported a dangerous near-miss incident. A spacecraft launch vehicle from a recent Chinese launch nearly collided with one of their Starlink satellites. The proximity was alarming, to say the least.
What are the actual risks of an event like that, a collision in orbit?
A collision, even a minor one, could create thousands of pieces of space debris, and that propagates what's known as the Kessler syndrome. It's a scenario where debris from one collision creates more collisions, and those create even more debris until certain orbits become completely unusable because of the sheer volume of high-velocity fragments.
So this incident really raises some grave concerns about the current lack of any robust, internationally enforced space traffic management protocols.
It really does. With so many nations and private companies launching these huge satellite constellations and mega rockets, the need for some real rules of the road to avoid collisions is more critical than it's ever been.
And to address that very issue, Brazil and China are deepening their cooperation on space safety.
They've launched a joint space laboratory. It includes a telescope that's specifically designed to track satellites and other objects in space. The initiative is aimed at strengthening their technological cooperation and enhancing surveillance and monitoring, specifically targeting space resource management and trying to mitigate these orbital collisions.
And meanwhile, the current human residents of orbit are continuing their vital work. How is life on the International Space Station, the ISS, for the Expedition 74 crew?
They've had a busy and pretty diverse week. The crew has been focused on a wide array of scientific investigations. That includes some advanced stem cell studies, which could potentially advance tissue production technologies for medical treatments back here on Earth.
So real, tangible benefits.
Absolutely. They also spent time evaluating the remote control of robots in space, which is essential for future deep space exploration missions where you just can't send a person.
And I heard they had some more mundane problems to deal with as well.
They did. Even in space, you have to do maintenance. That included fixing a temperamental toilet system. But even with all that, one astronaut reported that the view remains just as spectacular as ever, describing gorgeous skies of blue and clouds of white.
It's a great reminder that profound science and profound beauty can coexist right there in orbit.
Okay, let's bring it back down to earth and talk about the evolving health landscape and policy, starting with a major shift in how we approach cancer screening.
This is a genuinely significant development. It challenges decades of established practice and really moves us toward what we call precision medicine. A new study is questioning the traditional one-size-fits-all annual mammogram screening for all women over 40.
So what are they proposing as an alternative, and why is it considered to be just as effective?
The study suggests we pivot toward a personalized, risk-based screening approach. So instead of every woman getting a mammogram every single year from age 40, the screening frequency would be tailored. It would be based on an individual woman's specific health history, her genetic risk factors, and the density of her breast tissue.
And the research indicates that this tailored approach is just as effective in early cancer detection as the blanket annual checks. It is, but with some major benefits. It optimizes resource use, it reduces the number of unnecessary biopsies, and it minimizes the patient anxiety that's associated with false positives.
That shift from one-size-fits-all to risk-based medicine just seems so incredibly logical.
Yeah.
But implementing it globally would require some major institutional changes.
It does, but it's already prompting the American College of Radiology, which is a major standard-setting body, to seriously reassess its recommendations. If this gets adopted widely, it could represent a real paradigm shift in how we detect breast cancer, moving toward precision and away from a simple calendar-based mandate.
But precision is hard to achieve when a public health crisis is intensifying and the virus is constantly mutating.
Indeed. The U.S. flu season is heating up very rapidly. We're seeing almost 3 million individuals already affected, and hospitalizations are rising sharply. And what's driving this severity is the emergence of a new subclade K variant of the H3N2 influenza virus.
Can you break that down for us? What does H3N2 subclade K variant mean for the average person?
Certainly. So influenza viruses are constantly mutating. H3N2 is a common type that circulates. But the subclade K variant part means that this specific strain that's going around now has undergone enough genetic change that it can potentially evade our current immunity.
So immunity from both prior infections and from the standard flu vaccine that was developed months earlier.
Exactly. Health officials are sounding the alarm because the current vaccines may be less effective against this new dominant strain. And compounding this domestic issue, we're seeing critical healthcare strain globally.
I saw a report from the UK on this.
Yes, a nurse in the United Kingdom issued a very stark warning that resident doctors who are planning a strike next week could lead to avoidable patient deaths. And that's especially concerning because UK flu hospitalizations are currently at the highest level ever recorded for this time of year, pushing their National Health Service, the NHS, right to the brink.
We're also seeing these deep divisions emerge over basic public health policy, particularly in Florida, concerning children's health.
There is a very heated and deeply political standoff happening in Florida over a proposed plan to end pre-K-12 school vaccine mandates. This has pitted doctors and public health advocates in direct opposition to proponents of parental choice and individual liberty.
What are the key arguments on both sides of that debate?
Well, the public health advocates argue that rolling back these existing requirements is a direct threat to herd immunity. They say it could lead to the resurgence of highly preventable diseases, like the recent measles outbreak we saw in South Carolina. They point to the historical success of mandates in nearly eradicating diseases like polio.
And the other side?
The other side frames this as a necessary measure of individual liberty. They assert that parental choice has to supersede any government mandate when it comes to medical decisions for their children. The whole debate really highlights that classic tension between collective societal safety and individual autonomy.
Shifting gears to a different regulatory issue, let's analyze this highly contentious debate around testosterone therapy, which appears to reveal some real societal biases in health policy.
The Food and Drug Administration, the FDA, seems to be walking a very, very fine line here.
How so?
Well, on one hand, the FDA recently acknowledged what it's calling a testosterone crisis, specifically for cisgender men, so men whose gender identity aligns with their sex assigned at birth. They're suggesting a supportive regulatory stance on the benefits of hormone replacement therapy, or HRT, for this population to address issues like fatigue and muscle loss.
But at the same time, the FDA often maintains a much more critical and restrictive regulation of testosterone use for transgender individuals. And that contradiction is what advocates are highlighting as a systemic bias.
It's viewed as a major equity issue. Advocates for transgender rights argue that this discrepancy reflects broader societal biases that are getting, whether intentionally or not, baked right into health policy.
So they're saying that the supportive stance for cisgender men who need HRT for wellness contrasts sharply with the stricter regulation and the greater scrutiny that's often applied to transgender individuals seeking the exact same hormone for a necessary medical transition.
That's the argument, that it suggests a selective endorsement of a treatment based on gender identity rather than on purely scientific medical need.
Finally, in this segment, let's look at societal support and some really unique interventions that are aimed at healing profound trauma. There's a remarkable, but also very precarious project happening in the Gaza Strip.
Gaza MedTech is spearheading an incredibly innovative project. They're using virtual reality, or VR technology, to provide a psychological escape and therapeutic support for children who have been injured in the ongoing conflict with Israel.
That's incredible.
It is. Reports indicate that over 90% of children in Gaza are showing signs of extreme psychological distress. And these VR environments offer them a temporary respite from that trauma, a chance to mentally escape the crisis, even for a little while.
But sustaining this psychological lifeline is proving to be incredibly difficult because of the geopolitical situation.
Absolutely. The continuation of the program is being severely challenged by the Israeli blockade, which restricts access to the spare parts they need to maintain and repair the VR equipment. It's a critical humanitarian issue. A successful therapeutic intervention is literally struggling to survive because of logistical and political restrictions on essential technology.
We're also seeing a powerful call for systemic support for a different vulnerable group, this time in the United Kingdom.
A charity organization there has raised an alarm over the severe strain on families who are caring for adopted children. Hundreds of parents reported struggles, including things like addiction, mental health issues, and complex trauma among their adopted children that often persists well into adulthood.
So they're calling for the provision of lifelong support.
Lifelong, that's the key word. They're arguing that the trauma and the needs of adopted children, which often stem from experiences they had before they were adopted, they don't just diminish as they get older. It highlights the need for systemic support that extends well beyond the immediate adoption period.
And just on a slightly more stimulating note for the American public, we did see a major piece of financial relief announced this week.
Yes, substantial tax refunds of up to $2,000 per household have been announced for working Americans. This is a measure that's aimed at alleviating some of that immediate financial pressure for middle and lower income earners, injecting some liquidity into the consumer economy, and hopefully stimulating overall economic activity across the United States.
A significant fiscal injection. Time to address those persistent inflation pressures.
That's the idea.
All right, let's pivot now from the complex pressures of the present to some of the astonishing secrets of the past. It's time for some genuine archaeological breakthroughs that really capture the imagination.
I agree. And we're starting with one of the most iconic archaeological sites on the entire planet, the ancient city of Petra in Jordan. Researchers there have unearthed a hidden tomb right beneath Petra's iconic treasury building, which is known as Al Khazna.
That is a landmark discovery. I mean, the treasury itself is world famous. What have they actually found inside this hidden tomb, and what does it tell us?
Well, the tomb dates back over 2,000 years into the early Nabatean period. That was the civilization that built Petra. Inside, they found 12 remarkably well-preserved skeletons alongside numerous artifacts, things like pottery and other burial goods.
So why is that so significant?
It's incredibly significant because it offers deep new insights into the burial customs, the rituals, and even the physical characteristics of the Nabatean people. It's allowing researchers to bridge these critical gaps in our understanding of how this ancient civilization structured its high-status funerary practices, especially those that were connected to the treasury itself.
That's phenomenal. Meanwhile, in Europe, another excavation is rewriting history regarding the extent and the early timing of the Roman Empire's influence.
In Heerlen, in the Netherlands, archaeologists discovered the burial site of a Roman soldier. His name was Flaccus. And crucially, carbon dating confirms that this site is the earliest evidence of Roman influence ever found in that particular area of the Netherlands.
How does finding just one tomb change our understanding of the entire Roman presence there?
Well, the presence of Flaccus's tomb, which was complete with typical Roman funerary artifacts like pottery and tools, it definitively supports these historical claims that Heerlen served as a significant and very early military outpost for the Romans.
So it shows they weren't just passing through.
Exactly. It demonstrates that Roman soldiers were not just transient forces. They were establishing a long-term presence, and they were often blending their Roman military customs with indigenous practices. This pushes back the timeline for when the empire established these complex settlements in what is now the Netherlands. It makes it a critical anchor point for understanding Roman expansion.
From unearthing ancient history, we move to unearthing painful, more recent history and the ongoing struggle for reconciliation that's known as the Memory Wars in East Asia.
This term refers to the continuous and often very politically charged struggle over historical memory. It's particularly acute among nations like Japan, China, and South Korea concerning wartime atrocities, most notably the Nanking Massacre that occurred during World War II.
What is the core tension here? And why does this history remain so politically active decades and decades later?
The central argument, which is often voiced by Chinese and South Korean historians, is that genuine, visible, and comprehensive repentance from Japan is necessary to resolve these conflicts. The national identities of China and South Korea are often constructed around this narrative of victimhood and resistance against imperial aggression.
And that narrative contrasts sharply with what those nations see as an inadequate or even an evasive post-war moral reckoning from Japan.
Exactly. So the argument is that historical interpretation isn't just an academic exercise, it's a living, breathing political tool.
You can see it in the divergence in their historical textbooks and public commemorations.
Absolutely. It's all fueled by domestic political agendas in all three countries. China recently held a more subdued but still prominent memorial for the Nanking Massacre, which serves as this yearly reminder of the ongoing sensitivity. And until there's some kind of shared, globally accepted narrative, or at least a consensus on official government apology and responsibility, these memory wars will just continue to be a source of geopolitical friction.
Making long-term diplomatic reconciliation incredibly difficult.
Almost impossible.
This just shows that history is continually being fought over in the present day. Now, let's confront some of the disturbing failures in human dignity and public trust that have been recently exposed, starting with a grim case of coercive control in the UK.
The conviction of Robert Rhodes in Earlswood, UK, for the murder of his wife, Dawn, is a case that's important. It's just difficult to discuss because it highlights the extreme severity of what coercive control is. It's a pattern of behavior designed to make a person dependent by isolating them, exploiting them, and depriving them of their independence.
And the most chilling detail in this case is the degree of manipulation that extended to their own child.
It is the ultimate betrayal of parental trust. Rhodes manipulated his own child into participating in the planning and the execution of the plan that led to Dawn's death, and the child, despite the unimaginable trauma this must have inflicted, later provided crucial, harrowing testimony in the courtroom that secured the conviction.
It just raises these profound questions about the psychological damage that's inherent in domestic violence and the severe long-term consequences of this specialized form of psychological abuse that can turn family members against each other.
This is a horrific case.
And we have two separate, also horrifying stories this week regarding profound failures in dignity and accountability, this time within the funeral industry.
The first occurred in Gosport, in the UK, where 2 funeral directors were found guilty of serious neglect. They were discovered to be storing 46 bodies in a mortuary that was not only unlicensed, but, critically, it lacked proper cooling facilities.
46 bodies, improperly stored and neglected. That is a fundamental breach of professional ethics and just basic human dignity.
The sheer scale of the neglect is just staggering. The findings prompted immediate calls for legislative reforms, better industry oversight, and enhanced training to protect public confidence in a service that is inherently based on trust during a family's most vulnerable time.
And the second, equally disturbing case comes from the Bay Area in the United States.
A lawsuit was filed there after a funeral director mistakenly handed a grieving father a bag containing his deceased son's brain material instead of the clothing he had requested for the burial.
That level of carelessness, a complete lack of basic quality control in handling human remains. It just inflicts irreparable psychological harm on grieving families.
It absolutely speaks to a systemic failure in accountability within that industry. The deepest form of human respect is routinely promised, but sometimes, as we see here, it is catastrophically failed. These incidents aren't just isolated mistakes. They expose these deep cracks in the systems that are designed to safeguard our dignity after death.
And tying together high-profile power, systemic failures, and the pursuit of accountability, we saw the resurfacing of the Jeffrey Epstein scandal this week.
Yes, House Democrats released a new cache of photographs that were obtained from Jeffrey Epstein's estate.
And who are the prominent figures featured in these newly released images?
The photos showed prominent figures, including President Trump, former President Bill Clinton, Prince Andrew, and Woody Allen. The release was described as a very calculated political move, intended to intensify scrutiny on their long-standing connections to Epstein and his highly publicized abuses.
And while all of these figures have consistently denied any wrongdoing or have distanced themselves from Epstein over the years, the public release of new visual evidence is a very powerful tool in shaping political discourse and renewing that pressure for systemic accountability.
It absolutely ensures that the intersection of high-profile power and legal accountability remains firmly in the public eye. Democrats are using these photos to fuel their narratives around systemic issues and the long-term pursuit of justice for Epstein's victims, forcing a continued public reckoning.
Okay, let's shift gears now to the sporting world, where high-profile events are increasingly being shadowed by commercial friction and, well, logistical chaos.
We have to start with the biggest global sporting spectacle there is, the World Cup. FIFA is currently facing this mounting pressure from fans groups over what they're calling a scandalous ticket pricing strategy.
Scandalous. That suggests the pricing has gone way beyond just simple profit-seeking and is now actively excluding the core audience.
That is the heart of the frustration. 5 million ticket requests were generated in just one day. That shows the immense, overwhelming demand. But fans are voicing anger and disappointment because the costs are just prohibitively expensive.
And not just for the tickets themselves, but for the mandatory hospitality, travel, and accommodation packages that go with them.
Right. It's effectively pricing out the average loyal supporter. So fan groups are urging their football associations, like the FA in England, to lobby the Fédération Internationale de Football Association, or FIFA, for a change. They're arguing that this level of commercialization completely undermines the spirit of the World Cup as a truly global, inclusive celebration.
And this theme of global star power meeting logistical chaos was painfully evident during Lionel Messi's GOAT tour in India this week.
This turned into a major public relations disaster. Messi's highly anticipated event in Kolkata just descended into chaos when angry fans started throwing chairs and bottles in frustration at the organizers and security.
Why the intense outrage after so much buildup?
Well, fans who had paid significant amounts of money for these tickets were left feeling completely cheated because Messi only appeared on the field for about 10 minutes before he was hastily ushered away.
10 minutes.
10 minutes. The incident just highlights the extreme challenge of managing these global star expectations, particularly when event promoters overpromise. It underscores the crucial need for better organization and crowd control at massive events where the high price point means the threshold for fan dissatisfaction is extremely low.
And while commercialization is causing chaos, a more insidious threat is undermining the fairness of elite competition itself: doping.
The Athletics Integrity Unit, or AIU, chief delivered a very grim warning this week. He stated bluntly that dopers are finding increasingly sophisticated ways to get around the current testing systems. This signals a growing concern about the structural integrity of our anti-doping measures.
What kind of sophisticated methods are they worried about?
The AIU is concerned about advancements in things like microdosing. That's using smaller, more frequent doses that clear the system much faster. And they're also worried about the growing risk of gene doping, which is incredibly hard to detect because it targets the body's own genetic machinery to enhance performance.
So the battle between innovation and regulation is present even here.
It is. The AIU chief stressed that a much more robust, adaptive, and technologically innovative approach is necessary to outsmart those who are trying to cheat the system, just to ensure that the integrity and fairness of elite sports can be maintained.
Before we wrap up, let's touch on a few cultural and political footnotes that give us a sense of global life and, thankfully, some light relief as well, starting with resilience in the Caribbean music scene.
There's a wonderful surge in new Caribbean music releases right now. We're seeing tracks from industry heavyweights like Sean Paul, Anthony B., and Machel Montano, Sean Paul's new single, Faith We A Keep, is particularly notable. It draws inspiration from the resilience of the Jamaican people following the devastation of Hurricane Melissa.
So the music emphasizes themes of perseverance and communal strength.
Exactly. And protection. It really showcases how music so often reflects and even aids in community healing after natural disasters.
And shifting from contemporary culture to classic literature, we have the enduring relevance of Jane Austen.
Yes, as Jane Austen's 250th birthday approaches, commentators are discussing why her characters, Elizabeth Bennet and Mr. Darcy, why they remain so relatable and so constantly adaptable across different media, even today.
And the consensus is what?
It's because of her universal themes. Love, rigid family dynamics, the struggle for social mobility, and her incredibly sharp social commentary on the constraints that were placed on women. Her ability to capture the human experience, regardless of the era, just makes her stories timeless.
And finally, a moment of pure, unadulterated light relief that only nature could provide. Tell me about the drunken raccoon that went viral.
The notorious Virginia raccoon, affectionately dubbed the trash panda by locals, has gained viral fame for its mischievous antics. It is strongly suspected of breaking into a karate shop.
A karate shop.
A karate shop. And once inside, it's believed to have consumed alcoholic beverages that were apparently stored there. This story just serves as this genuinely humorous reminder of urban wildlife adaptability. It shows that in the midst of all these global financial crises and technological angst, nature will still find a way to break into a dojo and have a very, very good time.
I think we all needed that one.
So if we try to synthesize everything we've covered today, we are navigating a world that's defined by this profound, continuous tension. On one hand, you have this relentless, often reckless push for technological progress.
Right, whether it's AI creating market volatility because the infrastructure can't keep up, or SpaceX reaching these near trillion-dollar valuations based purely on the promise of going to Mars.
And that progress is simultaneously challenging all of our established regulatory and constitutional frameworks. We saw it dramatically in President Trump's one rulebook AI order, creating that state legal friction.
And in the UN's complete inability to impose proper life cycle accountability on AI's huge environmental footprint, all because of geopolitical lobbying.
Meanwhile, all these old geopolitical tensions are just manifesting in expensive new forms. You've got financial warfare with the indefinite freezing of Russian assets using emergency powers, a move that risks undermining the euro itself.
And these ongoing proxy conflicts, where U.S. political figures are directly linked to disputed ceasefires that fall apart the moment they're announced, which then sparks resistance from groups like the ELN in Colombia.
Here's where it gets really interesting. We've seen this powerful movement in the health sector that's advocating for precision moving from these annual blanket checks to personalized risk-based cancer screening.
Yet, in stark contrast, we've also seen these profound societal failures in human dignity and justice. From the conviction of Robert Rhodes, who weaponized his own child in a murder plot, to the horrors exposed in those funeral industry scandals in both the UK and the US, where the fundamental dignity of the deceased was just utterly disregarded.
So, what does this all mean? The ultimate tension for us as informed global citizens is to ask, how does a society decide where to apply precision, like in risk-based medicine, to optimize our outcomes, and where we must ensure universal compassion?
Like the lifelong systemic support that's being urgently requested for adopted children, or that innovative VR therapy for traumatized children in conflict zones.
And maybe most importantly, are we prepared to hold powerful institutions, whether they're funeral homes, high-profile political figures, or global sports bodies like FIFA, truly accountable when both that precision and that compassion fail the very people they're meant to serve?
That is something for you to mull on and explore on your own. Thank you for joining us for the deep dive.
We'll catch you next time.
You're enjoying Artificially Informed.
Hit subscribe and share it with a friend.
From the left, the right, and straight from the algorithm.
Thank you.
That's it for today's Artificially Informed.
Nope. Thanks for spending your time with us.
Yeah.
Stay sharp, stay curious. See you next time.